afternoon. Welcome to the February 27th, 2024 board work session. It is now in order. Mr. Gibbs is not present. Are we able to call the roll ourselves?
Yep.
All right. We don't have legal counsel, so we're just going to wing it. Ms. Jenkins? Here. Ms. Campbell? Here. Ms. Wright? Here.
Here.
Mr. Trent?
Here.
All right. Mr. Susan?
Here.
All right. Wonderful. Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance All right. So our work session today does not have a real hefty agenda. The first thing that we have is the discontinued book title update. I'm going to turn the floor over to Ms. Harris. I think you're going to give us a quick update on this.
So good afternoon to our board members and Dr. Rendell. We, in front of you, have a handout, and these are titles that were removed at a board meeting, and we're just looking for
packets right here.
some direction for next steps and just some clarity. So what the language in the law says is it speaks to
That's his
objected
packet.
titles that are silenced due to pornographic information or the language around sexual content. And so at that meeting, we pulled quite a few titles just as we gained clarity. And so in the chart in front of you, you'll see some of the titles were on our formal objection list and were stopped for sexual content. You see the light blue column. Those are titles that are on our formal objection list, but were stopped for language that was not necessarily pornographic. And then the third white column, those are titles that were removed, but they are not on our formal objection list. And you see you have the title allegedly, that was stopped for language, and then the next two, they were stopped for sexual content. And so we're looking for direction moving forward of that white column. Looking around, is your definition of objected titles, those titles that have gone through the formal objection process, and that makes them an objected title? Or I know there has been some conversation around objected title is once our community stakeholder comes up and speaks to that title, that is their form of objection. So we're looking just for next steps around, obviously, when we printed this out, this was before we knew of the vote for No More Girls, so we're clear on what to do with that one. But all of these titles are currently not on the shelves. So we're looking for the far right column, next steps based on, are we acting as though they are objected if they were stopped for sexual content? Are we considering them objected because the stakeholder came to the came up and read them aloud and then they were stopped for sexual conduct? Or are we saying they did not they were not formally objected?
Okay.
I know this is sounding clear as mud,
Yeah.
but it's just
Sorry,
splitting
we're
hairs.
kind of-
We want to be clear.
We're navigating through a fun topic. So just for clarification, I know, Paul, you just got back, so I apologize for the last minute question I'm going to ask you. But if they were objected because of sexual content, I believe, my opinion would be that they should be on the removed books list because they were stopped from being read, even if they've not been formally challenged. That's my opinion. Question about being stopped for language versus being stopped for sexual content. Can you tell me, does the statute clearly define that you must stop it because of, do you have it up right now? All right, go ahead. If you have it up, if you'll read it for
I
me.
thought this would be helpful to all the conversation. So it's that section of 1006.28, just so y'all can find it later or go back. It's number one little, I'm not, just find it. I lost track of which number it is, but in there, that part says, parents shall have the right to read passages from any material that is subject to an objection. If the school board denies a parent the right to read passages due to content that meets the requirements under subparagraph B1, which is pornographic or prohibited under 847.012, the district shall discontinue the use of the material. If the district school board finds that any material, and then, right, and then it talks about, then it goes on to other things that it's not related specifically to them talking to it. But if it has to do with 2 through 4, which is the sexual content, conduct part, that is, it uses the same words as far as, so it doesn't say anything about language. It's only about pornographic sexual conduct, those things. So, but I will tell you, the result of all of them, just to go back to Ms. Harris's question, is if the school board denies the right, the school district shall discontinue. If the school board finds any material meets, B1, the pornographic one, they shall discontinue the use of the material. If it's 2 through 4, which is the sexual conduct, the district shall discontinue the use of the material. So to me, the result is the same regardless. So it is, these books, if we own them, they are subject to objection. So my opinion is that if we stopped them for sexual content, that they, whether they're on our formal list or not on our formal list, that they should be removed, but not for language.
I'm of that same opinion. I believe if I stop them from language, it's no different than if somebody gets up there and starts hurling curse words from the podium. We have to stop them from talking. It doesn't mean that they're not allowed to speak. It just means they're not allowed to speak the way that they're speaking. So I'm of the same understanding. If we stop them due to language, it still needs to go through the process. If they were stopped due to sexual content, then they need to go on the list of removed books, i.e. this column that you have on the right-hand side, that are not, this column here, these are not
but not
ones
all
that-
of them. The first one, it wouldn't be. The other two,
So
it
the
would be.
first one on that far right column, the first one was stopped for language. The other two were stopped for sexual content. So we would be
It would move to the-
just looking at that first one that was stopped for language.
Okay. But it's not on the formal objection list right now
Correct.
anyways. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's why we were unclear, just with the language around objected, is it doesn't say formal objected.
Right, okay. All right, board, what's the rest? There's only 2 of us that have waited on this. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this?
I concur.
Yeah, I want to weigh in. So I have a couple of questions. First question being, did we confirm whether or not these are people who are parents of children in our school system?
So we are unable to do that based on just them speaking because we just have their name.
So we know for a fact that there were at least 5 to 7 people who don't even go to Brevard Public Schools who were up there at that podium reading. We can identify them. Some of them identified themselves. I do not believe that we should be making any decision off of that alone. Again, I'll go back to the governor, who literally just said that himself. If you are not a parent of a student in the school system, that should not be a consideration that we're having. That is my opinion. I don't believe that it should be for language. I also am going to go back to the argument that I made in the past. So when you read that statute and it says shall discontinue, our policy already discontinues the use when something is formally challenged. They're already removed from the shelves. So the ones that are formal objections already in that box right there, I argue they've already been discontinued. We've already met the letter of the law. I believe they should still go through the challenge and the policy that we have in place, because otherwise what we've just created is some way to circumvent the policy we have in place, and it doesn't make any sense in my opinion.
Which is what the statute is doing.
I don't think
What?
it's done yet.
Okay. Again, when there's the 2 outliers that are on the not formal objection list, I question who was reading those books. Because, again, we had a press conference from the governor and the Department of Education saying, we have too many, we got to change the law, we're going to start fining people for making egregious things, making egregious requests, they're not even parents, blah, 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 blah. And we know, we all know, everyone up here knows, that I want to guesstimate 7 out of the 10 people that were speaking that day don't even live in Brevard County. And we can't confirm whether or not the people who were in Brevard County have kids in our schools. I think we need to be taking this seriously, taking control of the policy that we have established as a board, and we need to be the ones making those decisions, not the public intentionally coming up here and trying to circumvent it. So again, I believe that the ones that were already on the formal objection list already met the letter of the law. They should continue through the committee review policy, and that's my opinion. Otherwise, you are literally opening the floodgates. And I guarantee you, in March, you're going to have all those people show up again.
Yeah, and just for clarification, I mean, we can pull the public comment card, which should be able to tell and identify pretty quickly, because they're supposed to fill out their address and their name. So it's trackable to see, are these Brevard County residents even if they're not?
The
Then
tricky part is that the statute vaguely, I mean, it doesn't describe. It just says.
Well, it says a parent of a student to whom or for
I-
whom
I
instructional
understand that.
materials.
But I know you all watched the press conference with the Department of
I did.
Education and Ron DeSantis. So you can't be fearful of what the ramifications are when the governor and the head of the Department of Ed point blank said that over and over and over again.
I do think that particular, and I didn't get to watch the press conference, but I saw the articles that came out after there. I thought that was specifically talking about people who are bringing challenges, not this part that has to do with, and I don't like it anymore because I don't like that it opens up the door for people to come and
Agreed.
read the material in our board meetings when we're trying to take care of business. I don't like it at all. I've made that very, I fussed about that several months ago, but, it's in there intentionally to kind of circumvent the process. I don't think necessarily for Brevard, but for the districts that aren't maybe handling it in the same way. But I will say there is a difference between the language in the statute of discontinue use versus what we have in our policy when somebody submits a formal request. And our language is remove from circulation. And there's a difference. To me, the discontinue from use is we're done. It's not going to be in Brevard.
Right.
What we have done currently with these books is they are removed from circulation. So we haven't discontinued use. That's kind of the permanent end decision, not the remove from circulation. That means we still have them. They can go back, like Kite Runner, all those are going to go back, have already gone back. But there's a difference in that language that kind of separates the result.
Can I want to challenge that though, because it's all language that's up for interpretation. And if it's up for interpretation, it's difficult to fear legal ramification when both sides can be argued. If it's removed from circulation, then it can't be used. So it's discontinued from use. It's not available anywhere. So if it goes into the formal challenge process, it's not sitting in one school and removed from another school. It's completely removed. It is unusable. And so I argue that it could be said that they're already discontinued from use. It cannot just readily go back on the shelves either. It's going to have to go through this review process in order to get there in the first place. So it's not like a willy-nilly back and forth decision. I think it's something that, we should be asking legal counsel about how they feel which way or the other.
Well, if I may, the Commissioner on Education has his ways of enacting policy through the Department of Education. The governor can veto, but the legislation that we have in front of us is from the legislature, which is the intent. So if the governor and the education commissioner come out and they say, hey, we're going to do this, if they do it, that's one thing. If they want to start trying to do that's their avenues. But the core of what we read inside the statutes has nothing to do with their purview. They have specific roles to the statutes, but it is not to create the laws. If they want to create the laws, they have to go through the legislature in order to do so, to put it inside the statute, or it becomes educational law and code. So it's just so you know, like, they can pop up and say all they want, but they're not going to define the statutes. The statutes are law that is done a different way. That's all. Just wanted to kind of clarify that.
So to get us back on track with what Ms. Harris is looking for, I think we need to make a clear decision on this. So I still stand where I stand with mine. I believe that the ones that are stopped for language still need to go through review. I believe that the ones that are not on the formal list that have been stopped, obviously, I still think, they need to be put somewhere because they were stopped. So we can't just say, oh, we're going to ignore it and not make an account of the fact that we stopped those books due to content. So they can't go back into our libraries, is what I'm saying. And if we don't put them somewhere, then they're potentially going to come back into the libraries.
So,
So I didn't add that part. I don't think that they should just go back into the library. I think in order to follow the discontinue rule, they would have to be in the formal challenge process and removed from
And
the
just be
shelves.
in formal challenges for the rest.
so something that may help with the two titles that were removed for sexual content that have not been formally objected, we also have teams reviewing our books in the district, period. So whether they've been formally objected or not, just with the rollout of the language to make sure that we're being compliant. So what we can do for the ones that are, we don't have to put them through the book committee process because we have never received a formal objection on them. But we can have our district team review those two titles to confirm, do they either meet the letter of the law around the sexual content or not as that off-ramp without going through committee. And then The first title, now I say this, we have a couple other people than the two ladies here that are part of our team, but it's still a very limited team to read the number of books. But what we can do for that first one is, because it was stopped for language, that one, because we haven't yet confirmed, does it have sexual content in it, we can do the same thing. We can review that. It will take some time, and we just want a direction for when they're stopped for language. So we're hearing that when they're stopped for language, we're going to go through the process we would, either if they were going to be objected and going through the book committee process, or that the district team is reviewing them to see, do they meet the letter of the law to be on our shelves. I think that helps us in knowing our next steps. We know that the two titles, House of Earth and Blood, What Girls Are Made Of, those are books that we would do first to confirm with that off-ramp. And then, so we won't put any of these back on the shelf today. We will do our process. We just wanted clarity on the formal objection, if they are stopped and why they're stopped, but I think now we have that information going forward. If they are stopped for language, we would do our due diligence. We would not remove them just based on stop for language without knowing that they have sexual conduct or content included.
So can I clarify then what, in the middle of that, I think I lost track of what we're doing with the two on the third column that were stopped for sexual conduct. Are we removing those, or are we putting those through the committee?
They would not go through the committee necessarily, because the books that are coming through committee we've received a formal objection to.
Right, I mean,
So
not
they would
the,
be
not the reading
stopped.
committee, but your
Right.
team.
Well, that is where we just need, because they have sexual conduct in them that violates the language, that we just wanted to be clear that what you guys call an objected title is what we're considering an objected title. So just confirming that sexual conduct, that was why they were stopped. And so when we go into that language where it speaks to sexual content or pornographic material, those two titles would go through that process. Because they were stopped, if you're saying that's an objected title, they would be discontinued use.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just want to make sure, because to me, if they were stopped, whether they're on the list or not on the list, they all are subject to an objection, so they need to be removed in the same way, treated the same way. Okay, sorry, my microphone's on.
And what we can also do, that night, we were doing our best to record, and we've watched that meeting over and over to record. We can also, if needed, we can look if it is apparent or not. But if the book has sexual content in it, that becomes a little of a moot point if it's apparent or not. Yes, for removing it based on being silenced here, yes, it requires a parent. But if we find that the title does have content that's not allowable under the language, we would do our district process for that. So we're going to, these two books confirm the sexual content is there, that they were silenced for, that they won't go back on the shelf, and then with the allegedly, we'll be reviewing that with our district team.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ford, you okay? Yep.
Yeah. On a side note, I'm just going to throw this out there, because I think things after that night will settle down. I think our community has understood that this board's doing the best they can and doing a good job, and better than most, I'd say, in trying to deal with the situation. But there are other districts that add a step in their board meetings, because we're not the only ones that this happened to, that they do, if a parent says they're going to read from a book, they do not stop them, but pause them. They have somebody pause the timer or whatever, they have somebody in the room to confirm that that's a book. It's something I brought up last year, but, that's actually a book on our shelves, so people aren't walking in reading things that aren't, that's something that we don't own. So just something to consider. It may not matter at all. It may not come up, but that's something that we could do, and we could even confirm that they're a parent at that time, So, I mean, it's something we could do just to try to limit that. What I would say the governor was trying to limit, misbehavior or theatrics on behalf of people who the law was not written with that intent.
So I appreciate you trying to mitigate that problem, but I don't think that we can do that, because we cannot police what people are saying with their First Amendment right to come here and make public comments. Yes, there's a limit, of course. So it's so just randomly stopping people and asking what they're going to talk about and whether or not it's something appropriate for here because we don't have the book or not is going to get us into a weird situation. Also, you can't require someone to say who they are, where they live, and if they're a parent.
Right.
My whole argument was we knew who those people were. They lived in Indian River County. Like that was my whole point. But we can't legally require that of somebody either. So I don't really know if that's necessarily going to fix the problem. I appreciate you bringing it up, but I think it'll just get us into weird situations, even more situations, and they'll just start making up names and places and all of that.
Agreed.
But I do think it is something that we should be taking consideration of after the fact before we make decisions that we're making for Brevard Public Schools.
All right, does anybody else have anything that I need to add to this conversation?
No, other than thank you for
Yes, thank you.
your hard work in this
I know,
sensitive topic.
I know.
And these
So-
two ladies right here.
Yes.
Your
and
whole team.
Your whole
Yes,
team.
It is a village, yes. Okay, so part of our team just wants clarity around discontinued use. So if we're discontinuing the use based on it being silenced for sexual content, discontinued use is in order for it to get back on our shelves, and this is a question I'm posing. My understanding would be that to get it back on our shelves, we would do the same vetting we would with a new book purchase to make sure it's in compliance.
Does our policy still have
Our
the,
policy has a time stipulation on it before it's
years.
able to come back in, but that's
Yes,
if it's formally
If
challenged.
it's formally challenged, we have a timeline on that. If it's discontinued
not.
use, we do not. If it's discontinued use based on something that happens here at a board meeting and of a parent speaking, there's not a timeline. It just says discontinued use.
The statute doesn't address
Also, when we are going through our district process, if we determine a book meets that off-ramp and it is being removed, there's not a timeline to that either. It's discontinued use. And we've been working under the understanding that if in 3 years, 4 years, 15 years, a media specialist wants to bring that book back into his or her collection, they would then look at the language as we're doing with, every time we're purchasing a book now, we have that language out, and that would be part of that, can I purchase this book or not? So what we do, and it's kind of like when we're removing a book, we inform our media specialists. But if in 5 years, a media specialist wants to consider bringing that book back, they would have to do just what we're doing now with every new book purchase, reviewing that law to see if that title meets. We can, we have a list of everything we've removed, whether by committee or by district committee or team. We're clear on what we have removed, and the people currently in all the positions are clear. But we do not have a timeline written into policy. If it's removed outside of the book committee, there's not a timeline per se of that. We've just gone with discontinued, knowing that if it were coming back into a collection, it would have to meet all the criteria a title needs to get back into a collection.
I have a question.
I have a question too.
So this was why when we were revising this, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, when we were one of the steps a couple times ago, but it was brought up, it was so important to make sure we're documenting in the system, right? Because what you just described is a situation, if it's not clearly labeled in the systems, in the order system, I don't know exactly how it works, then there's potential that we could have a brand new media specialist next year who goes, oh, I'm going to order this book. And maybe it's one that just got removed. They could, the Nowhere Girls. So, we're going to bring in the Nowhere Girls. What is in there that's going to pop up and say, you can't purchase this book because the school board voted to remove it? So that needs to be crystal clear. And I know that the law doesn't describe for us how to bring things back, but discontinue kind of, to me, would say,
Sounds
like,
definite.
it's done. Yeah.
You mean like a ban?
The media specialists to know, the state requires us to submit a form every year of books, and they keep a list. So the media specialists consult that list before making purchases.
Right. And it still could be something that is, because other districts pulled things for all different reasons, which is why we didn't go with,
I think what's good about the
Statewide
state
list.
list and what What we don't have on that state list that we would like is the why it was removed, and that's not
Yeah.
there. But what we do have is whether, regardless of how the title is removed, it's on the state list. So whether it's through book committee and board recommendation, if it's through district team, if it's removed because of a speaker being silenced, it's on that list. So I think moving forward, because we can put it in our, like, Follett systems, but again, we don't know in 3 years that that'll be our vendor. You know, there's so many variables, but that state list, now that we have this language, that will be updated, and at the end of the year, I think it's by June 30th, each year, we put all the titles of removed. Now, we do inform the state why we've removed, but whether it was removed through board recommendation or district committee, it is on that list. So if that's something that our media specialists always have to reference, that list would be one way to catch that from happening.
Okay, I noticed in the statute that, that part about reporting to the state, and it is June 30th, it says, each material that was removed or discontinued, and you don't have to give a reason, but then the next one says, each material that was not removed or discontinued, and the rationale for not removing or discontinuing the material. So have we did this already once, right? Because June 30th, so did we send any of the ones that were, because there were a few that were not discontinued, they were limited, right? So in the list that we send to the state, did they publish that, the ones, they'd publish that as well, with the rationale?
No rationale.
Okay. So they ask us to give the rationale, but they don't publish the rationale?
Correct.
I wish they'd do it the other way.
We've
seems like it needs to
requested
be that
that
way.
just because that would be helpful, you know, like if it would be helpful if they requested, you know, in violation of whatever, then
Right.
that would make our jobs
Right.
at least more expedient in making decisions.
I appreciate that.
I look forward to the day when we look at book publishers and there's a rating system on a book. I really do. Because honestly, it's crazy to me when you think about movies, you think about music even has explicit warnings on it. But for whatever reason, books have just kind of flown under the radar and that hasn't happened. Interestingly enough, with the movie rating system, that's a voluntary system. It'd be really great if publishers just took it along, you know, on themselves and said, hey, we're going to implement this because this has become such a hot topic all over the country.
Even video games.
Yeah, even video games. You're right. Even video games have age of, you know, but not books, which is interesting. So thank you for your hard work. I know it's a lot that you guys have been doing, that team. You're not clear? Okay.
About definite discontinue?
You can talk a little louder. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
We just want to be crystal clear.
Be-
We're
I
not
know,
trying to
it's as
beat this
clear as
horse,
mud. We
but
got it.
we're making decisions.
The part we're not clear on still is the ones under formal sexual content, if those are to be removed and don't go through the process.
Yes.
Right.
Or are they still going through the process?
No.
No, I would, I believe they should be removed and not go through the process because we've already stopped them. There doesn't, I mean, the district has the ability, could we just, no, I don't know. I don't want to open that can of
Yeah,
worms.
this is
That's
the
what-
hard thing because then it puts there's one decision maker and
I
no
know.
offense to you, but the board didn't make that decision, the chairman did. And any particular chairman of any board that did this
Right.
made that decision. But that is, we as a board, as this board in Brevard, that is the only, that's the way we, because of how we did or didn't address it and it happened, that's the only avenue we have,
Yep.
is that the chairman does it.
That's the-
There are
Right.
other districts who are handling this public comment clause differently so that the rest of the board can have some more input. And it's not just all on one person to make the decision in the moment. But unfortunately, I do believe the statute was written so that
Yes.
One person
it's
can
made
make the
in the
decision.
moment. Whether, and some other boards, like I was talking about Volusia, they have where I don't remember, I think they used the point of order term. If someone on the board, when someone starts reading and they think, oh, this is too far, someone says point of order, and then they stop them, or I don't remember exactly, I have to ask my buddy in Volusia how they do it. But it does put a lot of pressure, but like, that's what the statute says. So I think that I am of the same opinion, that this first column, this formal objection, that they're removed just as if they had gone through the process and we voted.
You're talking about the last column, the columns that are
No,
not.
the first column.
The
This-
orange one where, because that would speak to the language
They're-
that the
but they're-
chairman
right.
stopped them from speaking due to
Yeah.
sexual content, so
Yeah.
then they would
But what
be
about the books that
discontinued.
aren't on our challenge list? Those are the ones that are in question. Those are the ones that we're trying to figure
I
out,
think she was
right?
asking.
Are you asking about the ones that are?
First column.
I think they just wanted clarity on, but I think we have it, because it's, if the chairperson stops the speaker of an objected title for sexual content, what Mrs. Campbell is saying is that that would be no different than if we sent a recommendation of a title to the board and you guys took a vote.
So I would argue the difference, though, is when you have that conversation about it getting back. Because it hasn't gone through the official policy to be removed, to put the timestamp that you want on it in the first place. So if you're circumventing the policy, you're also circumventing the things that you guys want in place. So remember that.
I didn't like that being put in the law, but it's in the law.
No, what I'm saying is if you don't continue it through the process and acknowledge that they're already removed off the shelves, they've already been discontinued, and you don't formally vote on it to be removed, then you don't have that timestamp of not having it be re-brought into the school system again.
So what a,
Here, I don't want to hear it anyway.
I know. I'm like this one, again, we're trying to clean up all kinds of things here. So would maybe a good solution to this be that book title goes on the next board meeting as something that's voted on, and then it kind of circumvents the process, but then the board all weighs in on it?
I think
Depends
if we-
on how, I don't
if
think
we
that's how
did
the
that,
policy is
It opens up
written.
the opportunity to go against state law,
Why-
which is, you know
If,
what I
if it's the
mean?
same as if we went through the process,
I know.
where it doesn't have a time specific that it comes back, that also says, if it goes on our do not buy list from the district, there is no time that it comes back. If it's through statute, we said, what, 5 years, our policy, I mean? So if it doesn't go through that, that doesn't, it's not 5 years,
All right, we got to clean this up, though, and it's not
We're
cleaned up
done.
right now, and so that's why they're
out.
trying to get clear
That's
direction
not
on
what the
this.
policy is. The policy is
But if
if it's removed through the book committee process.
Right.
This is-
Right.
So,
board's
and I'm like, I don't
decision is
even
fine.
want to
That's
utter
fine.
the
We're
words
not
that we need to go
committed to
back to
5 years.
policy making on this one, but I think it, and I've said it multiple times, I don't think we're done
But-
touching this one.
So
And-
I understand your emotions behind this, and I know your opinions on this, which obviously differ from mine. But what I'm trying to argue here is to make it clear and easier, and to stop people from coming to this podium continuously and doing this, or prevent it as much as we can. It's already off the shelves. They're already challenged. They're not there anymore. It's already discontinued from use. The state's not going to come down and go, Brevard County, you didn't discontinue use of these books that are not on your shelves right now, that are in a formal challenge that clearly you all want to vote to remove anyway, so you know the end result of this. They're not going to do that. That just doesn't make any sense. And then it goes through the process, and then you have your timestamp and you're following the policy, and then you take away the random power of people who don't live here coming to challenge these books at the podium. That's my argument about the discontinued use thing. Again, we all know where we all stand on this issue. I know what the end result's going to be.
I understand that. I would like to challenge your comment that we clearly know where we all stand on this, because this board has actually made the decision to keep a couple books in that have gone through the formal challenge. So that's not a very fair statement for you to make, Ms.
I'm
Jenkins.
not judging you for that. You did say, though, you want them removed right now. You just said it. So that is a fair statement. You all just said you want them all removed. That is a fair statement.
I said if they were stopped for the content.
Correct. So I'm not
they should
judging
be
you for that. I'm
removed.
saying that's what you said. You want them removed. That's not an assumption. You
Okay.
just said that.
So one of the things I would say is that if it's removed through the process of state law, that it should follow consistently with what our policy is for the removal on the other end as board members, just to be consistent. So to
Is
keep
your
it-
mic on?
Yep, to keep it consistent, I think that's what we do.
But I think the problem is our policy isn't consistent with state law. Our policy says we're removing it for a certain amount of time, and state law says discontinue. They don't align.
Well, then let's make it discontinued.
So that's where I'm like, okay, they don't align.
Well, except that where the law doesn't specify, then that's left up to the board to determine. The law doesn't say we can't have, it just says discontinue use. It doesn't, I mean, where it leaves it vague, that's our decision to make. It's one of the there's very few things where the state has made it clear, and where they don't make it clear, it's our decision. They don't make clear parent. I would take that as if we said it has to be a parent, you know, I mean, maybe it would be challenged and we'd have to deal with it. But, you know, right now, I'm trying to think, from what I have heard, the state has not come down on any district specifically and said, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And there's 67 different ways this is happening. But what we do have to do is report. Whatever way we decided to do it in Brevard, we're reporting it. And so I say they're not coming down. The legislature has come down and then refined what the asks are in some cases because some districts weren't following it. I think where we have wiggle room, it's our decision to make. And so whatever we decide today, I think we can decide. Do we want, if this happens again, hopefully it won't, but if it happens again and people come and read the title, do we want to decide as a board what we want staff to do as a result of the chairman stopping them? So I don't actually think it's a terrible idea for it to, if the chairman stops them, for it to be immediate discontinue. To me, there's definitely, the law says discontinue use. It doesn't say removal from circulation. So I'm gonna take that back. I mean, we can still do a vote.
But
But-
if you vote against it, then you break state statute, which says to have it removed. Does that make
That's true.
sense to you?
Yep.
So the argument
true.
is that we have to follow the state statute on that angle, which is
Yeah.
that path. And I wanted to say thank you for correctly stating where our ability to, navigate those waters are as opposed to the state law. But this one's pretty clear, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think that we follow that, is what I would like.
Okay, so what is your
So if it is
recommendation for
challenged,
these?
if it is challenged, and to be honest with you, you start to get into who's a parent, who's this, who's that. I don't think that it has to be a parent. I think it has to be, what is clearly defined or not defined inside the statute, you roll with. And if anybody comes up and challenges it and says this, if it's inappropriate inside of our school district to be read in front of us, it violates what the state law is, we remove it, and then it follows that path of being removed forever. And then we have our other process to go through if somebody challenges it that way. That would be my recommendation. Is that what you're looking for?
So the law does say parent, for the ability to read it. The objections say, and I don't know if it's in this statute or another one, parent or resident of the county.
Right. And it defines
So-
resident as,
So as far as bring an objection.
Basically
And our policy
anybody.
says bring objection. You can't bring an objection if you're not a
do they
parent or
clearly
resident of the
define who a
county.
parent is inside, do they clearly define who a parent is inside of the statute,
For which one? For the reading or for the other?
the reading?
For the reading, it says parent. No, it doesn't.
So
It-
one
it
of the
doesn't give a
issues you run
geographic.
into when you say a parent is
A
that,
parent-
because you have homeschool parents that may have half
So
the
here's what it
curriculum.
says. It says, each parent of a student to whom or for whom instructional materials have been issued.
So that would clarify that they need to be,
They got to be in our school
we've
system.
been issuing their materials.
Wait, what part of that?
Is that the reading part or,
Oh, that's the summary.
Sorry.
Brevard Virtual School,
Let
Brevard,
me open it up in the.
And I think that's why we're seeking the clarity, is we also want to be mindful to prevent
Can you tell me what
dealing
statute
with the
you're on?
expense of a
Sorry.
special magistrate, like
Florida statute
either
1006.28.
policy, law,
and then what
or
section?
district process.
Give that definition up there. 'Cause I'm
All
looking
right,
here.
sorry, give me 1 second.
So my whole argument is that whatever decision the majority of you decide, it's going to circumvent the policy that
That's
exists.
one.
So you can't get away with not rewriting the policy to address these issues. That's my argument. So we shouldn't be making the decisions before you rewrite the policy. It doesn't make any sense.
So here, under section 2A2, says the district school board must adopt a policy regarding an objection by a parent or a resident of the county to the use of a specific material.
Thank you.
So that's for our policy. So our policy has to allow a parent or resident of the county. But the
That's-
reading of the board meeting is it just says.
Different.
It's different.
it's different.
And I don't like it,
Right.
the circumventing the process, but the legislature specifically put this, like I said, intentionally to circumvent the process. What are you looking for?
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'll get there. Just give me a minute.
Each school must adopt a policy regarding objection
All right,
by
so
a
we're
parent
clear as
or
mud. We need to give direction. What do we want to do?
process.
I thought we did. These titles that
No,
were.
you
that struck-
didn't.
Okay, well, we haven't given clear direction. That's very
The
clear.
titles that were
You and I are agreed.
stopped for sexual content, because someone read it and you stop them for sexual content, should be discontinued permanently, as same as if, or permanently, the same as if we voted on them. And if that's 5 years, make it 5 years. Because that same, later on in that sentence, because it's all in the same paragraph, about them reading, and then also about district school boards deciding to remove them, it says the same language, discontinue use. So if our policy is we're discontinuing use for 5 years, then I would say it's for 5 years.
Okay. And then the title stop for language that are in the blue that have been under formal objection, we're going to continue the process for those.
The district process, your
Correct.
process. Yes, yeah, I thought so.
I just don't know how we find out if it's a parent
And
or
then
not.
were you telling us that that one,
You
it's
can't-
not
you
on the
can't
list that was stop for
request-
language?
can't
You guys
request
are
it.
going to put that on your internal,
You can't
Correct.
request
Group,
The-
reading
yes,
group.
allegedly. I mean, that's the
Okay.
title, allegedly.
you.
Yes.
yeah.
Aye, aye, aye.
Okay, but we're still not addressing the fact that we don't have a policy
I know,
that
well-
dictates what we just did.
Well,
So
if
that
we
has to be
do-
addressed.
It does say, our policy does address the.
I'm not saying you
parents.
can't do it. I'm just saying that's not something you should just
Well, that's
ignore
why
because
I
it's not going to be the last time that this happens.
We added that
Sounds like an
section in-
administrative procedure to me.
We added that section about parents being able to read, because when that law passed, Ms. Harris added on this on our last revision. I'm trying to find it.
And both of those policies are coming up on March 5th, I believe. So
Right.
we can see if we can clarify some language that includes the statute around public speakers that come forward.
Is it grandparent?
Right.
Perfect.
parent?
It uses the
Grandparents
same
raising
language as
grandkids.
the law. It says discontinue use, the board, the
I
discontinued also
understand
says
that, but it doesn't talk about the decisions you just made right now as a board, which you're going to want to do consistently if it happens again.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
pretty
I understand it
consistent.
addresses the language of the law,
It
which is
doesn't-
broad
doesn't need
and
to be
not
in the
helpful.
Put in administrative procedures, let's roll.
Okay. So just so that we can be clear on that, what we're going to modify the policy for March 5th is we have in there the law about if a parent comes to speak to an objected title. So we're going to add the same timeline that we have for the book review committee process that's in policy of the 5 years.
It's,
This
maybe,
is
it's
where-
L. L, the board's decision is final for 5 years, is L, and this part about parents reading it is N. So flip the order, make the L down to the bottom, and so that it's just clear that whatever the board's decision, whichever way that it got there, is final for 5
I know,
years.
but I think it has to specify because to stop them, it just says discontinue, but our policy says 5 years. And so when you stop them, that's where I'm saying this isn't, they don't align, they're not consistent, and we're gonna have an issue. So we,
Except
I don't
that,
wanna go
here's
back to
where I don't,
policy making on this.
here's where I don't necessarily agree with that, because after this is the new parts that we added. After the parts that say parents shall have a right and the district shall discontinue, this is out of our policy now. This is straight out of the law, but it's in our policy. Then the next one says, if the board finds any material meets the requirements, da-da-da-da-da, the district shall discontinue the use. If the board finds any material contains prohibited content under whatever, the district shall discontinue use for any grade level for which it's inappropriate. So basically, it's just the law clarifying our process that we had just laid out in the policy of where we're doing it. This is just a summary. And then it talks about how they can hire go to the magistrate and all of that. But it still then comes back to, I think that then it comes back to the board. So I think somewhere in there, we're still handling that. To me, I'm looking at our policy now, O and P are the descriptions of how the board has decided to handle this process. But the result is still discontinue use. So if we have defined discontinue use as we've made a decision of 5 years, that's it. Regardless of whichever way it happens, discontinue use needs to be consistent across whichever way we do it.
And just to clarify, the policy only bars for 5 years before it can be reconsidered. It doesn't mean it comes back in. It just means the board may need to reconsider that title.
So
And
it can be
with-
challenged again for 5
Right,
years.
it's to prevent people from challenging it constantly and so that the board's constantly taking up the same title.
Right.
So that I think 5 years you will be fine, because that doesn't mean it automatically goes back on the shelves. That just means it's eligible to be looked at again, and that staff may want to bring it to the board again.
Okay, so 5 years.
Okay, we'll add that for March 5th.
All right. Whew, thought we were done talking about all this fun stuff. All right, we're not. All right, our next topic that we are on to is an assessment update. I think that's still,
So you should have the PowerPoint in front of you, and what we want to share today is what is current as of today, and go into some details around what assessments look like K-12, but also give some recommendations moving forward. Because some things we've just done because we've always done, and then some things, you know, we have FAST in place, so we want to have some conversation about possible next steps. So we're going to start out with elementary, looking specifically by grade level. And I know this will seem tedious, but there are different legislation requirements around interventions depending on the grade level and subject area. So that's why we broke it into grade levels. But as you know, we have FAST, and so in kindergarten, that is state required, the STAR Early Literacy, and then the STAR Math 3 times a year. What is currently required, and I'm speaking of last year, and then I'll speak to this year, is the iReady diagnostic. What we did last year with FAST coming out is we made that diagnostic 3 optional. And so I want to just speak for a minute, because this will be as we move through grade levels. What FAST tells us is that a student has mastery of that benchmark or not. What it doesn't tell us is, if they have mastery, are they above grade level 2 years? If they got that one incorrect and don't have mastery, it doesn't tell us where they are. Are they 2 years behind? Are they 6 months behind? And so that's where we gather some other data. But what Dr. Smith and I have been working with Curriculum Associates, as well as a consortium of districts, because once FAST came out, it was, great that for once we had 3 times a year on grade level content, we could be progress monitoring students. But we also then, a week later, we're giving the diagnostic. And so we understand and we agree with our stakeholders that was a lot on students, and we worry about, getting clean data. If I have, 2 weeks in a row of what some sites we were realizing were considering that high stakes testing, that students were maybe, just clicking through, and which assessment were they clicking through, and were we really getting the diagnostic data we needed for students? And so in working with Curriculum Associates, moving forward, if we continue to partner with them, we still need that student-specific data in order to do interventions. But we don't, and they agree, they don't believe that needs to be in the form of a diagnostic. And so a platform that we would like to recommend moving forward is a lot of our students, when they go to center time, so the teacher table is 3 or 4 students, and then students are doing different things. A lot of our students do the instructional path on iReady. And what that is instruction and lessons on their individual level. And that's a way that we can differentiate, because teachers have a variety of levels, and that's a tool that they can use. So instead of sitting down and we're going to take the diagnostic, when they do their instructional pathway that meets them where they are, they're going to get a few items here and there throughout that instructional pathway that will give us very similar data that's student-specific that we used to get on a sit-down. Today, we're going to take 2 days of a diagnostic to see where you are. And so a recommendation we have moving forward is that we would not continue with the diagnostic 2 or 3 times a year, but instead consider an embedded model where we're able to get data on students in reading and math that meets them where they are without saying, okay, today we're going to stop and test. And when you look at this kindergarten, you see we have a KLS screener. It gives us different data. One of the things as a team we've been talking about is what are the data points of things that as a district we're requiring that may be duplicative of other data points. So with the KLS, that is where it's one-on-one. So the teacher is listening to that child read. So it gives us some different data points, but we also hear the voice of our teachers very loud and clear. If I'm a kindergarten teacher, doing that 5 times a year individually is consuming a whole lot of instructional time. And so when we look at this, our recommendations is that we would do that embedded piece so that it's not, FAST is the 3 times a year, and that we would do that embedded piece for kindergarten to get that ELA and math data points that, it's an item here and there when they're already on their instructional pathway, but that we would really evaluate that literacy survey if it truly needs to be 5 times a year. Because it is a one-on-one assessment, and also making the recommendation that perhaps there's a test out. So for some students, they come to us reading in kindergarten. So are we still needing to, yes, we want to measure them, but we have other tools just in regular classroom instruction where teachers can gather data on student performance without potentially doing that survey 5 times. So, but this is all current, and after we go through all the grades, we can talk about, directives that you guys would like us to consider. But those are just some recommendations that we make around this. Again, not testing for the sake of testing. If it's not driving instruction, why are we doing it? Then here is where, and in the PowerPoint.
So Ms. Harris, can we go back to that slide
Yes.
real quick? Just want to summarize what I'm hearing you say is, on the right-hand column, you've got iReady diagnostics, both reading and math, and those will go away. The
As we know
diagnostics
it,
would go
yes.
away for next year.
Yes,
So that's 4 test experiences that would be removed.
correct.
And then the kindergarten literacy survey could be reduced, the number of those.
Correct.
Okay, just want to summarize. Thanks.
What's Math Boy?
So that's beginning of the year, we like a
Oh,
good
okay.
acronym, yes. And we have an EOY too, that's end of the year. And so really, again, looking at those to see what is the data gleaned. We want to arm teachers with the data they need to make decisions, but we also want to, we're really diving deep into how are teachers using this data? If it is just a chart they're looking at, but it's not driving instruction tomorrow, what is, we're taking up some instructional time to do that. And so really looking at when we start our kindergartners in Brevard, they come 3 days later. And so initially, what those 3 days were utilized is for that kindergarten literacy. So parents would bring their child in for the appointment, and we would do these screeners. And so we would know on day 1 what this child comes to school with which skills. And what we have found is in many schools, they're doing some school readiness activities during those 3 days, like they're bringing students in to have different experiences, but that they're in some cases waiting on that literacy survey until school has started. Well, so we would be saying if we are going to continue with even the initial survey, that happens for those parents that bring their children in for those appointments, knowing that not all children come in during those 3 days before we start. But that was the design when Brevard made the decision to delay kindergarten start by 3 days. It would be so we have one-on-one time with students to set them up for success on day 1. This is where, this has been a huge aha as we look into our optional assessments. We have, depending on if children are going through that MTSS process and we're like, they're struggling with Tier 1 instruction, we need to know more. Is there more going on and we need more data? We created a menu in both the ELA and math of here's where we can get more information on students. So schools at the beginning of the year get all of these optional assessments. But what we thought the intent was for when you need to collect more information. In some of our fact finding, we have found that schools and classroom teachers are making decisions of utilizing these. And so what we are proposing as we go through these optional assessments is that for ELA and math, for sure, holding those at the district. And so then if an assistant principal says, we need more information on this child, we can release those assessments. This isn't something we're set in stone about, but what we are finding is that in some classrooms, all of our optional assessments are being provided to students.
Yeah.
And how we found that is when we're partnering, and getting teacher voice, they're saying, well, this is required and this is required. And Dr. Smith and I are meeting with them and we're like, that's not required. And sure enough, we're going into Performance Matters and there's data there. And so we just want to kind of rein this in because you can do an assessment every single day, but if you're not teaching in between assessments, the data is not going to change. And so we were thinking of pulling those back and having them, we've built them all, but having them on an as-needed basis. If a child is going through MTSS and we need to collect more information, then we can release some of those. Or, you know, we can release them to school administration, but with very careful guidelines of, this is not just for, if I want to give all of these assessments, that's not without conversation first.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
So this page, because some of these, like a unit assessment, seems like that would be like, that's the end of the chapter test, right? So are you saying that you would pull those back? It seems like that in a course of study, that's pretty normal, right?
Well-
You finish a unit on fractions and you're going to have a fraction test. That wouldn't preclude the teacher from having their own, this is not the one is this the one that's attached to the curriculum or attached to the instructional materials?
Correct. So what we did is we picked out the items that were most critically, the heavily assessed, or what you need to know by the end of that grade. So we know we have all the benchmarks, but here are the ones that you absolutely have to be successful. And that's where we made the quarterly assessments.
Okay.
And so in lieu of taking a unit, so every 9 weeks, there's an assessment that students could take. What we are finding is they're doing the quarterly, but then they're also doing unit assessments, and when we're having conversation with teachers, they're saying, well, I need grades. And I go back to, there are things that we can do as a district. If it's a matter of grades that you're doing this, you really want to see where that student's performance is, we can give a child 2 or 3 questions, and you know quickly, do they have it or do they not? A unit assessment for the sake of grades, again, good intent by our teachers, like they want to have data on their students, but with the quarterly and the unit assessments, what we are finding is those are all in use. And so to your point, yes, we want to say, okay, we studied fractions, where do they know? What we built in the unit assessments is we took out, here are some items on improper fractions, and here are some items, you know, so that we're taking out pieces, and in that 9 weeks, they're having a snapshot of what they know.
Okay.
When we get to science and social studies, and again, you're going to see a lot of this is duplicates as we go through grade levels. But one thing I do want you to keep in mind is in Florida, our 5th grade students take the science assessment. That is currently the one and only time we know what our students know in science as far as on an assessment. So we have optional assessments, and what these have been built are there are 4 or 5 questions that a student could take of what they know for their grade level. These have always been optional. They are not heavily utilized, nor are the social studies, but none of them are required. What we do want to just consider is when I take that science state assessment in 5th grade, the standards being tested are what I was taught in 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And so we would like to, as we move through, just have some conversation about how can we get some snapshots around science, because you know what I know about our 5th grade data. That's the first time I know how our students are doing in science. But we also, again, have all of these, a lot of science little quizzes that we have found are being overutilized in some cases. So when we go into 1st grade, you'll see a lot of this is similar, remembering that this year we have a Diagnostic 1 and a Diagnostic 2 for iReady, that would go away as we know it with our recommendation for next school year. In 1st grade, I want to bring your attention to the Brevard benchmark assessments. And there are components within that assess fluency. And we are open to, you know, being mindful of what our student experience is, but we don't want to take away the fluency checker. So there are parts of that assessment that we feel we can get from both FAST and ongoing classroom information, but that fluency, if you're looking at the science of reading, that fluency piece in 1st and 2nd grade, that is our indicator that says this child will be ready to read to learn by 3rd grade. And so what is required by the state for our RAISE schools, so our RAISE intensive schools, they have a monthly fluency check. Once a student meets the number of words per minute, they're not assessed again. But that is monthly for our RAISE schools, and remembering that those are our most fragile schools with reading proficiency. For our other schools, that has been quarterly. But if we were to remove also that benchmark assessment, we would like to maintain a fluency check. That's one piece of that assessment that we feel strongly a fluency check is the one time a teacher gets to listen to that child reading to see, is it an issue with comprehension or can they not decode the words?
I'm just going to jump in here because it's, I mean, I could say this for every grade level, but the benefit of keeping some of these that you're talking about is that the STAR and FAST, when we get to the older grades, and iReady are all on the computer, and these other district assessments that you're talking about, many, if not all, are the ones you've highlighted, these benchmarks, these are the teacher sitting next to the kid, you know, and some students are going to have an advantage or a disadvantage strictly based on was on a computer or not. So I think it's important for us to, I appreciate the work that you're doing to make sure that we have some of this so that we can find that a kid actually can be successful. They just can't be successful with the equipment, which is why it really makes me sad, even though I understand why. It makes me sad when we went to paper pencil and we left paper pencil a couple of years later to go to this, because some students really just, the temptation is too easy to click, 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 you know, computer version of a Christmas tree, you know, to get through it. So having some kind of one-on-one or small group evaluations is really important, is what I'm getting.
And here's what I can tell you as a prior third grade teacher. I'm looking at data as a third grade teacher, and I can't always, they're not answering the questions right. But when we dive deep, oftentimes it's not that the students can't make meaning of the text. They cannot decode the words. So they have that first and second grade, when we think of that early literacy and importance, by third grade, they've learned enough to compensate. And so you'll hear parents say, you know, my child's reading every night, I don't understand, but are they reading the right words? Like sometimes they will look, and that's when you'll see a child with a picture of mouse. The word is mouse, and they say rat, and they think they have it right because they look at the picture cueing, and that's why in legislation that part went away. So some of this one-on-one just gives us good data, and maybe not for all students, but as we need to know more about certain students to better intervene on where they are. So when you move into second grade, again, very similar, you'll see for our requirements, again, D1, D2, D3, we did as an option last year, and a lot of our schools still picked that up and we're doing it. We have continued with that is an option for this year, and then moving forward that these would be removed as we know it with an embedded model. Again, going into those optional pieces here, when we start to go into third grade, that's where things become a little different, because remember, third grade is where we're looking at statutory language around student progression. And we want to make sure that students have more than one pathway to get to fourth grade. And so we call it, their ticket to fourth grade. We know one way is to score proficiency on that FAST assessment. But we know for a variety of reasons, many of our students rely on that portfolio. And so when we look at that Bavard benchmark assessment, while we've kind of, had some discussion with teachers about what is the value of that, is it driving their instruction in some of the grades? In third grade, that is approved pieces for that third grade portfolio. So if a student were to come at the end of third grade and not be proficient on the FAST test, we have those artifacts that can be their ticket to a good cause to fourth grade. And so that is something when we think around those quarter 1, 2, and 3 assessments that we're being very mindful. Again, when we look at an embedded, if doing away with the diagnostic, but having an embedded model, we would still have a data point, because the state gives us different criteria of how students can go to fourth grade to show mastery. One is FAST, one is a portfolio, the other is an alternate assessment, which Curriculum associates with iReady, so that we would have a score, even though they're not sitting and taking the diagnostic. With those embedded items, we're gonna still get a number that could then be a ticket to fourth grade for our third graders. So that's the only difference when we get to this area. The other is, I'll bring your attention here to when we go to third grade. We did some work around science a couple years ago, because we had districts that were moving faster than we were. And that's when we started looking at how can the PENDA lessons align. So these are all optional, But what we have done, since our materials aren't aligned to the benchmarks currently, because we're coming up on adoption in a couple of years, the PENDA can kind of take the place, not computer-based instruction, but there are lesson plans, lessons and activities that we have embedded into our curriculum guides. But this is where we do encourage schools, at some point, you need to figure out, using some of these optionals, which of these benchmarks for third grade your children have, because they're not going to take a state assessment until fifth grade. And it's unfair for our fifth grade teachers to hold them accountable for a test score in fifth grade that is heavily those third and fourth standards, with actually very few that are assessed that are taught in fifth grade. So we just want to make sure our third and fourth grade teachers, and I understand it, third grade teacher, it's all about getting them to read, on grade level. But we want to make sure that they have options for gathering data around science for third and fourth grade as well. But again, these are all optional. Fourth grade, you could say exactly all the words I'm going to say, because you've seen this and you've heard me over and over for all these grades, but we do have a state assessment in fourth grade that is the best writing. So that occurs in April, so our students begin to take a writing assessment. So you'll see when you move to the district required, we have a 3 times a year writing assessment that's preparing. Again, teacher feedback says, is that driving instruction? And so really looking at, do we continue with a district writing assessment 3 times a year to prepare for a state writing assessment? Is it truly driving instruction? What are teachers doing? And there is a teacher voice that is not valuing a 3 times a year assessment for writing. A recommendation I would make is, if we're doing a writing assessment in the first few weeks of school, I would be okay with recommending that we abandon that, because most of our students haven't had formal writing instruction that will be similar to what they're assessed on. So I don't need to give them an assessment when I kind of could predict what that data may be, when I could in turn spend the time teaching the writing instruction.
That's it.
So, when we get to fifth grade, the state adds in that science assessment. Again, we have all optional when it comes to science and social studies. So that state assessment is currently our first time where we have any science information on our students. And then you will see sixth grade, it reverts back at the state level to ELA and math, and with the addition of the writing.
Can I go back to the PENDA? I don't know if
Yes.
So right now, those are optional. I mean, they're using PENDA, and they have that option. I guess it's not required. We're paying for it for all the schools, so they can do. It's kind of like an iReady for science, right? Where it's individual to the students, if they can have
Yes and no.
PENDA time.
So it is where it gives them opportunity to refresh standards that they don't have.
Okay.
So that it has that component. But what it also has is lessons for direct instruction.
Okay.
And that's why, we've really advocated for PENDA, because we've seen it work. But it also has been very helpful because, yes, there's the computer piece, but what we did is where our current instructional materials don't hit the benchmark strong enough, we've been able to embed that. So it's not a case of, like with iReady, we recommend 45 minutes of ELA instructional pathway. We don't recommend that for math, and we have no recommendation of minutes for PENDA, because there are only so many minutes in the school day. But what we do say is, okay, during science time, if you have a 45-minute to an hour science block, here are lessons that you could be utilizing in PENDA that can support where our textbook has gaps and holes.
But we're not requiring them to
So it
do
has the My
that.
Pathway like iReady, but it also has the instructional lessons.
Okay, thank you.
And then for sixth grade, you'll see it's very similar. We've included the link on the PowerPoint that's uploaded, and that is where we list everything that is both required and optional. And if you click on that list, it is very lengthy. And that is where we're absolutely recommending, when we've had conversation, is we're putting it out there so that if schools need something, we've created it and they have it. We want to be very mindful of, is it potentially being misused? And I give the example everyone knows. If you get on the scale every day, but you don't change what you do in the 24 hours, the number's not going to change in the manner you want. And that's how I feel about assessment, is we can assess every day and collect some really great data. But if we don't prioritize the instructional time, the data point numbers are not going to trend in the direction that we are wanting. But I just caution you, when you click on that link, remember those include everything possible that we have.
So, can we pause for just a second just to talk about this
Absolutely.
for a minute? Okay. I mean, when we look at these assessments, board, and we're going, I mean, kindergarten, there's 18 there. First
Right.
grade, there's 16. These are district and state. Second grade, 16. Third grade, 16. Fourth grade, 20. And then it goes up from there. I'm like, this isn't including spelling words. This isn't including quizzes. This isn't including, so honestly, I'm so thankful that you guys are looking at this, because I do feel like our teachers are bogged down with just assessing, not able to teach. And our kids are stressed. I mean, they are. So speaking from having my own kids in the school system, they're like, I have a test every single day. And I'm like, how do you have a test every single day? Like, when is there ever time to teach anybody anything? So I'm very grateful that you are taking a deep dive on this. I think this will be honestly tremendous for our teachers. I believe they're gonna probably sing praises for years to come over this work that you're doing right here. So thank you for looking at it and researching it. I'm looking forward to getting these numbers down to where it's not test fatigue for our kids all the time. So,
I have a iReady question. So we have purchased the toolbox that teachers can use lessons from for small group or for class instruction if they see a deficiency across, most of the class. Will the embedded piece still give them, will that still tag some of those toolbox things for them in the same way that the diagnostics did?
It will. We have been meeting with them. They're probably sick of meeting with us because we're saying, here's what our teachers value. We have heard loud and clear, they value Toolbox. Because I can customize instruction and it's already there. I don't have to go find a workbook. I don't have to go do this. I can click on Tara Harris and see here's what she has, here's what she doesn't, and click on the PDFs that are already prepared in Toolbox. And so the reporting teachers will have will be the exact same. The difference is on the student experience side. And we've noticed it. We've heard, we've said repeatedly in this room, iReady Diagnostic is not high stakes, should not be high stakes, yet then we'll see, get a good breakfast and go to bed early, and students feel that as high stakes. So we know our teachers value that data reporting, and they will have all of that. The student experience will be, I'm doing my pathway right where I am, and every once in a while I'm gonna get a couple items that are gonna give me that data point. And so we will be, I believe they said in like a 4 to 6 window at the beginning of the year, we will have all that same reporting with access to Toolbox, as well as access to Standards Mastery, all of the same pieces that can be driven by that student data. So the data will still be individualized.
Okay, thank you.
All right, may I go?
yeah.
I wanted to say thank you. A good instructor knows where their children are at inside of their classes. Even when I taught American history, I had 150 kids to 120 kids, depending on the year. I knew exactly where they were inside of the curriculum. And the problem you have is when those kids take a test, it's very difficult to pull them in and then do instructional either before or after it also, because they're prepping for it and then afterwards they're fried, right? So you lose those entire days just based on that. And you lose that ability to connect to them and get down to the root of, okay, what do we need to do to get it to the next level? And I really appreciate, because when I look at this, I don't just see tests, I also see days of instructions that are given back to our instructors. And I think that that's the most important thing when we start moving towards, you know what I mean, this testing cycle and stuff like that. I have some follow-up questions at the end of the presentation,
Okay.
but I just wanted to say thank you so much for what you're doing.
Yeah, I have something to add. So I do want to thank you for bringing up the fact that if you continuously get data, there's no time for the teaching, right? And we all know that, and our teachers know that too. But it's just the culture and the pressure that they have. You know, when their salaries were tied to assessment results for a long time, when there's pressure from administration, because that administration also feels pressure to show performance and growth within their school as well. So not only taking a deep dive on this just to mitigate the experience for our students, but it is mitigating that experience for our teachers and relieving a little bit of that stress and burden, and ultimately the administrators too, right? So I appreciate that. But the other piece too that I think is really, really critical is how you addressed the fact that some of these tools are intentionally to monitor where our students are. And so if we're giving them in the beginning of the year and assessing something that they should have completed by the end of the year, there's value in that. But if we don't have to do that, there's also significant value in not depressing the confidence of that student. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we've continuously been doing, even with, you know, the progress monitoring testing that we have. We see value in that, don't get me wrong, but there are plenty of students who feel like they're not achieving because they're not hitting, they just don't understand that concept that they shouldn't be there yet. So I appreciate you acknowledging that and just reiterating that to our teachers and our administrators. My daughter's only in second grade. She probably has a little test anxiety. I mean, I can see it already, but for her to already talk about things like iReady in first grade and second grade and have like her own self-fear behind it, that's, you know, that's sad, that's concerning. And I know she's not the only one, and it's not her teacher's fault. It's definitely her nature too. But you know, it's just something we need to be conscious of for our students, that we're aiming towards them learning, not just assessing them. So thank you.
So when we move on to secondary, they, as you know, have a lot more state assessments by content area. So you'll see on the left side, those are our state required. And then we have district created for, because for the algebra geometry, they only have that EOC, so they don't have the FAST of progress monitoring along the way. So we have a district assessment that for those courses can tell teachers, okay, mid-year, where does the student have half of the content, or where are they with what we've already taught? Is the content they're missing the content that we'll be teaching before that EOC? Kind of like a you know, progress monitoring tool is along the way.
Is that MAPS?
Yes. And then when you go in, we have a lot of optional again. It's a different feeling, I will say, in my experience now spending more time in secondary schools. It's just not the same where they're giving as many district assessments. There's not a feeling of as many assessments, that they have them available, but they're just not, I don't have the same caution I do with some of our other optional when I compare elementary to secondary. But these are the ones that are all available. Any questions on secondary or the whole K-12 assessment package?
Mr. Susan, I think you said you had some questions or comments to make.
Yeah, so I've been speaking to a lot of teachers and stuff like that recently, and one of the, related to our tests, they're saying that the windows of when we can test at the end of the year, we are testing at the beginning of those windows. Is that consistent with what as a teacher, I always tried to stretch when I could make that test, because what ends up happening ultimately is everybody gets into that test mode near the end. And if it's, say, May 2nd is the day of the tests, or April 2nd, if we're able to push it later into the end of the year, when the test starts hitting, the conversation starts hitting, there's more time to actually drill them, basically. And I didn't know if that was something that you guys had done. I have it written down in specific dates and stuff like that, but they were concerned that we were testing in the available window earlier than later. Is there a reason for that? I'm sorry.
So what we've done this year is NATA brings in from the elementary side and secondary side testing coordinators, principals, assistant principals to a cadre, because the state has the testing window, and then we identify, because we actually have a uniform testing calendar that we submit to the DOE, and so she brings them in. So in some cases, we've had school leaders say, kindergarten, they need to be doing it at the beginning of May, the closer we get to the last day of school. So there's kind of conversations around that.
Okay.
We can absolutely revisit that. If there is a concern of, if I only had 2 more weeks of instruction, what that could look like on the outcome. This is especially important when we're thinking around the FAST the students taking the FAST, because that mid-year assessment, some of the window is before winter break and some of it is after
Right.
winter break. And you have two different philosophies. You have some that say,
Yeah.
I want to have the assessment before the winter break, and then some will say, no, they're, excited about the holidays, I want it afterwards. So she does have a cadre, but we can absolutely look at that.
It was specific to the April, May areas. So I'll get that email to you. I just didn't know if that was something and that's already set for this year, but it might be something we look at for next year.
Absolutely, and we
Okay.
are already starting to look at that, especially when we think of grades like fifth or the high schools where they're taking multiple assessments, assigning the days so that students aren't doing back-to-back.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Board, any other questions in regards to this?
Looks like
Dr. Rendell, do you have
Rendell's
anything?
Chair, I
got
just
something.
wanted to point out, going through the presentation, I counted 30 assessments that are district required that we would be removing, and 12 others that possibly could be removed. So I just wanted the stakeholders, Ms. Harris mentioned the stakeholders earlier. That's parents, that's students, and that's teachers. We've heard from the stakeholders that there seems to be too much testing. So her team, talked to people doing the work, and some of the testing was not necessarily required, that maybe they thought was required. So we can clarify that. But there were some required assessments that will no longer be required. So, we don't want to stop assessing because we want to measure our progress. But it was clear in her presentation that we can over-assess and cut out time for teaching, which is the opposite of what the result is that we want. So appreciate the work that everybody's doing, but wanted the message to get out to the stakeholders that we heard you. That
Yeah.
this thought, this feedback, that there's too much testing, well, we stopped and took a look at it, and we're going to do something about it. So,
And I think that part of this also is to communicate this effectively to our stakeholders, that this is happening. Brune running the communications to, parents, our news articles, everything else, because it's been years. I mean, for 7 years I've been on this board, and we've been talking about over-testing and what's required and what's not. And this will be the biggest significant step towards that, and I appreciate you. That's all.
So I know our pacing guides have these steps along the way or stops along the way. So then will those pacing guides also be redone so that they'll give them a little more breathing room, but also they can get more content in there along the way?
We will revise them because right now we have some of those assessment windows built in to the pacing guides where they would naturally fall. And so the one that will be the least impacted, will be that third grade. So in our pacing guide, we already put, here's where a portfolio piece, and we link it right there. So that would be the one that's the least modified, but all of the other ones will be modified to give back that instructional time.
Good, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for all the hard work that you're doing here. This will be good for everyone all the way around. All right, our last topic that we have on the agenda is the modified school calendar. That's what I did there. Year-round school pilot for Challenger 7 Elementary.
It's the Miss Harris Show.
Yes.
Yes. You'll hear my voice in your nightmares. So today, I just want to share kind of our process. As you're aware, we were one of the districts selected for the year-round pilot through the DOE. And we applied, I think, back in October, November, kind of thinking that we'd hear back before winter break, and that didn't happen. So we're trying to play catch-up. So we want to inform the board so we can get some direction on next steps, because this takes everyone in the room to get this off the ground with success. So kind of just background of why, and a lot of this the Challenger 7 school community was once a year-round school, and a lot of the staff remain. A lot of the parents of the school were stakeholders, either as a student themselves or had siblings that went through that. So there was a want from the staff and community input. And then our being selected as one of the pilot schools, led us to begin this process. So next steps at that point included really surveying. We went and met Dr. Rendell, Mr. Raymer, myself, Mrs. Wright. We went and met with both the staff and the families. And we put out quite a few surveys for them. And so I want to just go over the staff input and the community input around are they embracing this possible change. So if you see the staff, Currently, it's like all but one staff member is very much on board with moving in this direction, and this includes teachers, but also our support staff members. If we look at parents, and we've even updated this with current data since that parent meeting, you see that there is a large majority of our parents that are requesting this change. At the meeting, it was interesting. Some parents came with some concerns, but after hearing from the teachers, they understood what the teachers were saying, and I think it allayed some of their concerns. What I want to let you take a minute to look at is what this would mean for students, but also as we start to consider staff allocations. So when we went survey by survey, and while it wasn't every family at the school, we did have a large turnout if you think that their enrollment is a little less than 500. And so we got to talk to a lot of the Challenger stakeholders. But when we look at some grade levels, when you look at that no column, that is about one class that would be exiting the school. When we think of that, what we have talked about, if the district decides, if the board recommends that we move forward, we would be looking at offering spots to the nearby schools at both Atlantis and Enterprise. Currently, as far as capacity, they could absorb these numbers. It would then start looking at allocations. So but I just want you to see the numbers, because as we talk about next steps, this gives you an idea of what it would look like per grade level. We also asked our stakeholders if this is not an option that works for your family, what is your why? Because that would help us problem solve next steps for the families. So you see the data here is a lot of this was schedule. In full transparency, when we put this survey out, the beginning of the window, they didn't have the tentative calendar yet because we were literally building the airplane as we were flying it in that initial stage. But then we went back in and got more data, and once we had pushed out the tentative draft calendar. In our survey feedback, so we had the parent survey, the staff survey, but we also had an email address for any stakeholder that could email me directly with any feedback. But it was very important that they maintain the current holidays within the traditional calendar. And some of that was because they might have siblings in schools that were on a traditional calendar, or they were employed at sites. And so that was a very strong feedback we received. It was also important that they wanted us to consider having childcare, so having our before and after care programs run during intersessions. And that would just be because if they were reliant on siblings that were on a traditional calendar, that we'd want to consider that. Another piece in the feedback was providing what we call like academic support or enrichment opportunities that we have offered in the summer, that we could offer some of those activities during these intersession breaks. And then obviously, being mindful of families that have students in 2 different calendar types of schools when making the calendar. So you have the draft calendar in front of you, and it has lots of color coding and shading, but kind of the highlights is this would begin with students on July 22nd. If you were here when Challenger 7 was last year round, you might remember an earlier start, so there was about a 5-week June summer, but knowing that we were turning on this with, we got this information late from the state, and so we wanted to provide families with not losing all of their summer, and so that is what led us to that July 22nd start date. In honoring the community feedback to align with already existing breaks, that became a little different than if you revert back to the last time Challenger 7 was year-round, because we now have like a week off at Thanksgiving. So there are different breaks that BPS has now, and so we tried to align the breaks so that they would back up in some cases. So like the winter break, that's the intersession. You'll see in the spring, you'll find that it's the week that backs up to the spring break. So they would just basically have an extended spring break. When we look at this draft calendar, something that is important to note is our before and after care, they're obviously district employees. And so when that intersession falls during the winter break, the district is closed. And so we would not be honoring, that commitment during that intercession of running our childcare programs. The same goes for during spring break, our BAS programs do not run. And so at this point, we could not commit to both weeks of that intercession. So we would run 1 week with before and after care, so summer programming, basically during that 1 week of intercession, but the other week would be your traditional spring break. Any questions on this tentative calendar?
And just for clarifying purposes, we're not running before or after school care during those times anyways for any of the other
Correct.
schools. So this isn't
Correct.
something that's different for Challenger than it would be for
Correct.
our other elementary. Just want to clarify that.
I can assume the answer here, but I'm sure the public is curious too. For the before and after care for those intercession breaks, will there be a cost associated with that for
There
families?
will. There will. It will be very similar to, we do run in certain sites during the summer programming. And so it would be a fee-based program during, that would match that rate that we pay now in the June. We run summer programs, I think, at 5 or 6 elementary programs, and that is fee-based, so it would be fee-based. What would not be fee-based would be our enrichment or our academic support that we would run. Now, that would not necessarily be a full day. That could be, an 8 to 12, students come, we're doing either enrichment or, different things that we would hire teachers using that academic support funding.
Correct, so
So,
if I could draw that out a little further. So during those intercession weeks, we could offer an 8 to 12 intercession enrichment period, or even longer, depending on what funding we want to direct towards it. And that would be bused, and that would be free, and all of that. So if that was 8 to 12, and you wanted to, stay for the full day, then you would only pay for the before and after care costs after that kind of thing. So most of the models we looked at that have a year-round or modified calendar offer some kind of instruction during that intercession time that's free. It's paid for with either supplemental instruction money or summer school money and stuff like that. So, those 3 weeks on this calendar, 2 weeks September, October, and then the 1 week in March, there could be, instruction provided for part of that day, and that would be free. So that's still part of the plan.
so I have a question, because I see the value in that. I totally understand that. But our students need breaks too, right? And so really, this is also because parents just aren't going to be able to adapt to that schedule and they need childcare for their students. So my question is, it sounds like we were awarded whatever from the state to do this. Is that coming with money?
That
No
is
additional
not
funding.
Of course
coming
not.
with money.
Okay. Because my follow-up question would be then for us to consider, because this is a pilot program that we are initiating and kind of pulling the Band-Aid off last minute to some families to make this shift, that we should consider some kind of support for those families for these intercessions, at least for the pilot year. That's just my opinion. I also think, because even though there was a significant response from families, there was 1/3 of those families in that survey that are not okay with the schedule. For us to consider that might keep them in that school for this pilot year, and you might win them over. So if we can, I know we can't talk about that today, obviously, but if that's something we can just kind of think about and possibly consider as a board to make this as successful as possible for that community, potentially saving staff members from leaving that school too.
It's only one.
What?
It was only one that was not
No, we're
favorable.
gonna lose one
Well-
staff member per grade if all of these kids who said they don't want to come back.
Well, here's
Okay.
what I do
Yeah.
have to offer, and it's on a future slide, is
Yeah.
what we will be doing is initially doing placement of the families that are saying, I'd like a traditional calendar. Then we're going to open up an application window for families choicing in. Because what we have heard from the community is they believe that there will be, potentially from some of those neighborhood schools in Port St. John, that
wanna
they
come
would
in.
want to apply in. So we won't know, obviously, if it's 114 out, 114 in yet, but that is what we are planning for.
And just for reference too, when Challenger 7 was year-round school before, it was on a wait list. It was at capacity always. So I anticipate that is a similar situation that we will see with this one. So just want to put that out there.
I understand that, but what I'm uncomfortable is the disruption of the school, the way it is now, and the people it's serving now, and the people who are serving that school now. And so I'm just asking if we consider possibly keeping it as stable as possible And because it's a pilot program and because we're the ones making this choice to institute this, to consider during this pilot year to possibly support those families, or maybe a threshold of families that we can support when it comes to that intercession. So that way we're not limiting people to be able to access the year-round school if they want to access it. I just think it's something for us to think about, just put the numbers on the paper and see what it looks like. I think we should consider it. That's all I'm asking.
The only thing about that is, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but all we're really doing is shifting around the decks, the chairs on the deck, right? I'm not gonna say the Titanic because it's not sinking, but we're just shifting around the weeks. It's still 180 days. We're just putting them in. So if a family normally would have to pay for childcare in the summer, in June, everybody's still gonna have June off, but in that part of July and August where now they'd have school, they're going to be paying, instead of paying for it then, they're going to be paying for it in other places. And our BAS is still the cheapest thing out there. And it sounds like, from what Dr. Rendell is saying, if we keep saying free. It's free to them, not free to us. And I want to find out where we're getting this money from to pay for the intercession, because that's one of the things when I was doing my conversation with people who are doing this, they had the money to do it when they first were doing the intercession. It was to do all these programs and to provide busing. I don't know. That's a maybe. We can if we choose to, if we have the funding for it. But for our families who want to take advantage of the intercession, the enrichment, and the what's the other word?
Like remediation?
Remediation, those things, that is no cost. So they would only be paying for like a half day, a 3-hour, whatever the rest of the day, if they wanted to do a full day. So I think we're just moving around for a family's budget. We're moving it from this part of the year to this part of the year. One of the reasons why this was able to be successful in Charlotte and the schools that they're doing it is the whole entire community kind of came around and they're used to this, right? So if our daycares, I think this is in one of your presentation, if the daycares in the area are also, because some people, even then, maybe BAS is not going to work for them. If they are on board enough to say, hey, this and the county programs and things like that, to know far enough ahead of time to say, hey, this school's going to be doing this calendar. You might want to staff in such a way and do your program in such a way that you're prepared to take on extra kids during these weeks. Which I'm assuming they already do, like during spring break and things
And
like
Ms.
that.
Maynard, the principal, did reach out to the daycare. So in the survey, it asked the community which outside providers do you use, and she has partnered with all of them, and they have agreed to support this initiative
Yeah.
too.
I hear what you're saying, Ms. Campbell. Just to be a devil's advocate, though, for a diverse community, a lot of families, when the chunk of time off is in one time, it's a lot easier for them to coordinate. They have grandparents come in, or they send them to grandparents, or one parent takes off vacation, the other one doesn't. And also thinking about our students with disabilities, a lot of these facilities aren't going to take those students. So it's just something to think about, even if there's like a threshold or a requirement or something, just for us to even just consider. I'm not saying it's a definite. I just think if we want this to be bought into from the community that already is using this school, I really think we should be supporting them through this first transition year if we can.
Ms. Jenkins, can you explain what that means as far as a threshold, what you're looking for? Like, what are you looking for, Title I?
Honestly, I think that's
Hang on, if I may finish. If you can do that. And then I didn't understand the comment of they may not be able to be picked up in another place for their disabilities. If you could explain that, thank you.
Many after school and daycares are not going to take students with moderate to significant disabilities. They're just not going to. If they have any kind of behaviors, they're just not going to. They don't have to. It's just a reality for many of our family students who have even just ADHD. If their child is, running around the room and knocking over furniture, daycare doesn't want to deal with that, and they kick that child out of that daycare. It happens all the time. And so this puts a lot of stress on families that we may not think about. But if they're in the schools, it's just different. It's just, those students are just treated differently, and we're willing to work with them and teach them and guide them. And so it's just something to think about. In terms of thresholds, really what I just mean is, honestly, that's for staff to think about, because I don't know what the cost would even be associated with something like this. I don't know the legality of what saying what kind of criteria that family would have to meet could be legal even. But I'm just throwing it out there. Just if we can support this community transitioning this quickly into something very different, again, I think it would be best for the students who are already going there that want to stay there, and the only thing stopping them is that schedule. Let us consider a way to possibly support them for the first year, that's all.
I just didn't, it's kind of a wormhole to go down, you know what I mean, without the guidance. That was all. I was just trying to have you define it a little bit more. And I will say, being a student, a former kid that was borderline ADHD, I think this is going to be incredible, because I think what you're going to see is, rather than kids and issues and problems, I think what you do is when they mentioned in there about the transitional weeks, about how you have community support and partners inside the community coming in to do it, I think it's going to be one of those stars. I'm really looking forward to seeing this happen. I think you do have a validity there, Ms. Jenkins, as far as, you know, trying to help some of those families, but I just didn't know what your definition was, and I was trying to help you refine it before we sent staff out on a wormhole, but I guess they can do that. That's it. Thank you.
All right. All right, we have a couple more slides, I think.
So these are just some of the questions you'll see here that came up at the community meeting and also through our email contact that we're working to address. We've been, we were very transparent in the parent meeting that this is pending board approval, like that we can't say that this is a for sure yet, that we just are collecting information, and as we have information, we are pushing it out through the principal as things come. But we were able to answer a lot of these, both with pushing out the tentative map as well as hosting the parent meeting and communications that Ms. Maynor has pushed out to her staff. Things we kind of already addressed, the placement of students opting out, and then the potential impact on staffing allocations. If we believe that we'll have a balance of incoming students, but we do know that we would work with HR if in fact more students go out than come in, that we would be shifting allocations. But we do have the capacity at both of the other elementary schools in the area. So this would not be looking at bringing in learning cottages or any type of portables. And then transportation possibilities. We, in talking with the parents, talked about if you do opt out, transporting you to one of those two neighboring schools. We did have some parents mention, well, I work in Merritt Island, I'd want to be placed at a school in Merritt Island. We didn't really speak to transportation outside of just that Port St. John community, just because for our other students that apply to alternate settings, we're not providing that for them. And then just extending choice options for incoming students. And that would be through an application process that we would open.
How far off are we? Because we don't open the elementary ELO window until April, May?
Correct.
I mean, it's already towards the end of the year anyway.
Yes, when I talked to Dr. Mayer, depending on next steps from the board, we may be able to have that an incoming option with our normal elementary and just putting that on there. What we did want to honor for the families that are asking to go to a traditional calendar, that they wouldn't go through the application. We're going to have a different pathway for them because they won't be, selected or not. We will be placing them in a site.
Right, so they get first priority.
Yes.
Right, no, I understand that.
What is the timeline for this to be concrete and set in stone? Those calendar.
We would need to be set in stone. Right now, this is like revision number 50 with all the different feedback. So this calendar right now would be the calendar that we would be submitting to the board for next steps. If you were to vote to move forward with this, we are working behind the scenes so that we're just waiting on next steps from the board.
And
So basically, what we would look for is some kind of consensus today. Stop what you're doing, don't do it, or move forward. If it's move forward, then we're going to bring the calendar back for approval at a board meeting. And then any other policy changes, or not policy changes, but any other things that we have to do to accommodate all of these needs would come back for board approval.
So I'm asking just specifically for, the families that have to deal with custodial agreements and arrangements. We had a disaster the year we randomly took off Thanksgiving break, and that was a legal disaster for many families. So just if we can make that as clear as possible for families as soon as possible, that is my recommendation.
Okay, I'm going to chime in on this one just because this has obviously been something I've been very vocal about, being passionate about wanting for all of our schools. And the funny thing is, as this calendar has come out and become public, I've heard from several people that are like, why can't we have this at our school? And I'm like, well, maybe one day. But just to kind of put it in perspective, when we had the teacher meeting, this doesn't happen like this very often, but we got a round of applause at the end of it. They were excited. So I was like, okay, staff is on board. They love it. And we got a round of applause from a lot of the family when we were having the conversation with them. This community they have used, it's actually, this calendar's a little more, I want to get to a place where we're not quite as long as we are even on this calendar for summer, because right now I think our summer is looking like it's, 6 weeks. And I know we're kind of easing into it. This feels a little bit like an ease into. But this schedule, I believe, the community is going to love it. I believe we're going to have a wait list at Challenger 7. I believe that that this will be something that's so successful that I hope other schools in our district look at going to this model. And I think you're going to see a lot of teachers that are very attracted to this schedule and the breaks that are there. As a family, I mean, think about it. You can go on vacation in September and October versus having to wait till Thanksgiving or Christmas or the summer, which are the most expensive times to vacation. And then again, the child care expense, thank you, Ms. Jenkins, is very thoughtful for you to think about the families that are maybe not in favor of this and how can we help them. I appreciate that perspective. But I do also have to echo a little bit of what Ms. Campbell said on, we're just shifting it around. It's the same amount of time off. It is just shifted around. And, I think overall, this calendar is going to be so successful, like I said, that I believe we'll see other schools that will want to jumpsuit with us as well. So obviously, my recommendation is move forward. Let's go. But we need board consensus on that. So I will be quiet and let the rest of you speak and chime in on this.
I'm excited. Let's go.
So I'm glad to hear about the community, staff, parents, and I think I had a conversation with Dr. Rendell. He said that the survey was done before you guys came in and did the presentation, kind of answered some of those questions. So if you did the survey today, it might be a little more different. You estimate it might be more positive because people are like, oh, okay, oh, that. And it sounds like before with the choicing in from the community that, that would take care of, because I'd hate for these 94% of staff who want it to happen and then, like 13% of them have to go somewhere else. Here are some of the questions that I think about, and we can't get them all answered today, but we have the potential anytime, any year-round school that's going to be one of our traditional public schools, we have families that move in even for our regular schools after Labor Day, especially if they're coming from up north, right? In a situation like that where a family comes in August 12th, because they moved in, they weren't paying attention, whatever, they come in to enroll, or they're moving up from the north and they come in, then in this case, here's the downside. One of the downsides is that we're already 3 weeks into the school year at the first day of school. If they come in after Labor Day, we're like 6 weeks into the school year. So they've missed most of the first quarter. What do we do with those kids? I mean, I guess we could say, hey, this is your zone school. We're on a year-round format. Yeah, you just missed the first 6 weeks of kindergarten, but you could go to this school over here. Are we going to leave that open for families who, because I don't know how transient the Port St. John community is compared to some of our other communities. And is this Title I school?
It's one of those, it's on and off.
It
On and
lost
off,
it
okay.
this last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be prepared to address that, so that just as if we're saying we're going to give the families that are zoned for Challenger 7 kind of a outside of the regular ELO opportunity, I think that needs to be ongoing so that any new enrolling family can come in, depending on when it is in the year. Because if we're after that fall break, then we're kind of caught up, right? But especially in that first quarter, if they're already 3 weeks behind or potentially 6 weeks behind or whatever, it's really going to be impactful for families that move in. So I would suggest that we would have an ongoing ability, and we kind of already do with the state law where you can go to whatever school, but I think from the moment they enroll, we need to give them their options and say, just so you know, this is the way it is, but you can, if you're willing to get your own kid there, here's a school a couple miles down the road, mile and a half down that way, whatever, here's your other options if you want the traditional calendar. We need to leave that to them upon enrollment for people who are moving into the area. Because I would sure hate for a kid to miss 6 weeks of of a
Right.
grade. And then these intercession times, I have concerns about, and these are concerns that can't be overcome, but I have concerns about funding because it's not always, an always every year Title I school. We're talking about pouring extra funds into a school so that we can run this calendar, which are funds that will have to be diverted away from other programming, or unless there's grants that we can get for things. So we're talking about putting funding into a program just so we can run this program in the way that the families want it to be. And I don't want to not do for certain kids, but if we're doing for them, there's some things we're not able to do. If I'm feel like I'm being not clear about that, but that's the downside. Another downside.
Can
for
I just
me.
ask you to elaborate
Yeah,
on
yeah.
what you mean for the funding? Because it's the same amount of calendar days, it's the same amount of, so,
But intercession's not.
well, and that
So-
would,
One of the things that we talked to the principal about as an idea, as we're exploring this, is all of our schools receive an allocation for academic support. And a lot of them run before school, after school programming. And we have all different levels of success with that, just due to teachers being tired, students being tired. Looking at diverting that funding to support the intercession. So it's still using the funding as allowed, but instead of doing after-school programs, using that funding to pay the teachers that would work the intercession. And
So it's enough to
It
cover-
would not be, it's just kind of a little out-of-the-box
Keeps going up.
movement of funds.
Right.
So to do away with the after-school program that's remediation or enrichment, reallocating that to the intercession dates.
We have that funding outside of ESSER.
Yes, while we had ESSER, schools actually got double. So
Okay.
they will go back to 50% of what they've had for 2 years, but they've always had that allocation.
Okay. Yeah, because that was my concern, because when I was talking about funding, we have to pay the teachers to do it.
Right.
And transportation, we'll have to find funding, because I'm assuming that funding doesn't cover necessarily things
Correct.
like transportation. That we'll have to figure out how we're going to pay for that.
So
And
it-
is this, I don't know if this is also a predominantly walking, maybe it's not that much, because if they only
it's
have one
not,
bus.
so
One
that's what
bus.
they do. They only have one bus that
Okay.
buses in, whereas the other elementary schools, I think one of them has 9.
Yes.
They're significantly higher. Challenger only has one bus that comes
Okay.
in, so it should be doable.
Okay. And I know Food Nutrition Services always has a way to find it out with their summer feeding program, and they have creative ways of dealing with the feeding kids. Yeah, and then the other input I would have is if we have, let's say only half of our teachers agree to do intercessions, we have limited spaces, how are we going to prioritize who gets to come? Obviously, BAS can ramp up as much as they can for their side of it, but I think if we can prioritize, for example, staff students who are going to be working, prioritize low-performing students. There needs to be a way, not just a first come, first serve. There needs to be a priority on the students who, like the people who are working there, obviously need a place for their kids to come. But, we need to prioritize those BAS spots and the enrichment remediation spots for the students who most need it.
And I think that'll be something that if we move in this direction, that we'll work closely with the school on, identifying those families that would have traditionally been invited to academic support or enrichment before, and working with those families, are they planning to come? So that, I don't want to say like a reservation system, but truly a planning so that we can staff it appropriately within the dollars that we have.
Right.
Which is really no different than childcare would be anyways, the same kind of idea where you have to make sure. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Mr. Trent, you look like you wrote down a few
sure.
things.
He's been
Yeah.
anxiously ready to hit this button. over
As a
there.
former teacher, great schedule. I really like this. I think this is almost a modified schedule, because it's not quite a year-round because of that large.
Right.
So you may be asked to keep it this way, but it is nice. And it isn't just set up that maybe we could take more and different time of the year vacations, which does lead to different experiences for children, and I understand that. But it's in hopes that we increase student achievement. And at those times in between, that we could provide some services, and everybody's a little bit better after that little bitty break there. So if it takes a little bit of extra funding or creative financing to help student achievement, I'm all for that. But I really think, it's not my area, you know those people a little bit better than I do, but I can see a waiting list as well in other schools. I really, I had hoped we would do something like this, during the campaign, we talked about turning education on its ear. This is part of it, is, let's look at our schedule, let's look at our calendar. So I'm excited, so you know where I'm headed. So we're good.
Is that a
Thank you.
yes, move forward and do good work, or what?
Absolutely, let's get it going.
Okay. All right, is there any other additional questions, or do you feel like you have clarity on
We do.
direction? All right. Hearing none, does any other board member have anything further to discuss today? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, guys.